Palestinian radical Islamist jihadists. And this is why I say they're demon-possessed. No, even a bad person cannot do this. Wow. It's been a week of terrible sadness in Israel. Horrifying news. Caskets returned to Israel. Dead bodies of people that we had prayed were still alive, but they're not. And we're learning more terrible and gruesome details of how Israeli hostages have been treated and how they've been killed, even small children. Welcome to the Inside the Epicenter podcast, an edition that I wish we never had to record, but we have to record it. This is Joel Rosenberg, co-founder of the Joshua Fund. I'm in California on a 2-month speaking tour. And Lynn, you're back in Jerusalem, co-founder of the ministry and co-host of this podcast. How you doing, sweetheart?
It's been a hard few days. Hanging in there.
Well, we feel like we have to walk you folks through this because this is what's happening in the epicenter. And that's why you listen to this podcast, to understand what's happening inside the epicenter, how to understand it from a biblical perspective, from believers who live in the epicenter. Lynn and I, of course, are born and raised in America. I'm a New Yorker. Lynn's Jersey strong. And we raised our boys after getting married. We had our children, 4 of them, and raised them in Virginia, and then made Aliyah and moved to Israel just a little over 10 years ago. Almost 11 years ago, we got our citizenship. In March, when we come up to that anniversary, we'll talk about the process of becoming Israeli citizens and the journey we've been on. But this is a hard week. There's been times where we've been able to tell you good, wonderful things, and this is not one of those times. Now, I want to give you some context. First, we're recording this on February 21st. That's a Friday, okay? So there's been big developments this week and over recent weeks, some things we want to catch you up on and things that have happened just in the last 24 hours. But there's more big news coming tomorrow, Saturday, February 22nd. We're expecting 6 Israeli hostages to be released all at once. So let's be praying that happens. But some of you may not be hearing this podcast until after. So we just want you to know we're recording on February 21st, Friday. Okay. So we've got more big developments. We'll talk about them soon as they all happen. I also want to just say right up front, and I want you to know that I'm going to be basically interviewing Lynn on this episode on what do we know about the live hostages that have been released in recent weeks, and about the bodies that were returned, bodies of Israeli hostages, but also a 6th surprise. So we're going to be talking about those things, reacting, how Lynn is reacting, how believers that she knows is in close contact with, how they're processing this news. We just want to warn people right up front. This is going to be a hard episode. If you're listening in the car or in your home with kids around, please just make your own assessment as parents as what you think is age appropriate. You might want to listen to this podcast first because there's going to be some difficult details. Again, we try to be very careful not to do anything that's not family friendly, but the whole war is something that's pretty bad. And this program is going to be particularly difficult. We're not going to be gratuitous in anything that we say, but we're going to be quoting some experts, some IDF officials we're going to give us some insights into some things that were done that were pretty horrible, to say the least. So I just want to preface that right up front, because if you're helping your kids, maybe you're homeschooling, maybe you're just listening as your kids are doing other things in the car, but kids are multitasking. They're listening. Our kids were always listening, even if they were doing something else, saying something else in the car, on our travels. So just be aware of that. And as parents ourselves, we just want to, say that right up front. Okay. Inside the Epicenter, of course, is a podcast produced by the Joshua Fund. The Joshua Fund. Well, Lynn, why don't you describe a little bit of the Joshua Fund and why we do this podcast, just so for people that maybe they're just starting to become aware of this podcast and they're finding it helpful. Why don't we start with just your description of what the Joshua Fund is and what this podcast is? This will also give our folks time to decide what they're going to do. So we're stalling just a little bit, but trying to give you some context.
Yeah, we started the Joshua Fund 18 years ago, and it has been from the beginning has the mission of blessing Israel and her neighbors in the name of Jesus. We really want to support the church here in the epicenter. So the way we describe the epicenter is Jerusalem is the epicenter, and then going out from Jerusalem, just like Jesus told his disciples that the way the gospel went out from Jerusalem, that's the epicenter of spiritual revolution. And it's certainly the epicenter of a lot of political revolutions over the years as well, including today. So we started it to really strengthen the church in this part of the world, in Israel, and then in the neighboring countries. So we support believers in Lebanon, in Syria, in Jordan, in Egypt, in Iraq, and of course here in Israel. And when we say Israel, we mean both Israeli Jews, Israeli Arabs, and Palestinians. We work with everyone here in the land, as well as other minority groups. Whoever is here, the Bible described the people that are non-Jews living in the land of Israel as sojourners, and there's really biblical mandates for taking care of the sojourners and caring for them like they're your own family. And so we have a lot of international people here, especially in Jerusalem. And so we started this to really strengthen the church through humanitarian work, through direct helping pastors, training pastors, giving Christian workers support, extra support, whether it's financial or whether it's helping them get training or conferences. So we do humanitarian work. We do the spiritual work of strengthening the church. And then we also have an education mandate, which is really to try to tell the world, and we really mean the whole world, about God's love for this part of the world, his love for Israel, and the fact that he's not a Israel-only God. He is a both and. He loves Israel. He has a special plan for them. They are the apple of his eye. And yet, at the same time, he so loved the world that he gave his only son. And so that includes our neighbors. It includes our enemies. It includes everyone to the ends of the earth. But the Joshua Fund focuses here, of course, on the epicenter. And this podcast is an element, a really important element of that educational mandate, just really wanting to help people understand what's happening here on the ground. We've had the privilege of living here for it'll be 11 years this summer. But coming in and out of
11 years those have been.
It's been an
Wow.
amazing 11 years. But
Yeah.
and you've been coming, of course, since you were a college student studying here. So and we've had the privilege to get to know some really wonderful heroes here on the ground. And so we're really privileged to let people know about what's happening and about the people and what God's doing here. So that's the privilege of this podcast.
Amen. I wish podcasts had been around when we were, in college, and we were just so thirsty to learn all things about what was happening geopolitically, economically, and certainly spiritually, most of all here in Israel and the Arab Muslim world. Wow, we would have just loved that. Maybe we probably wouldn't have done as much schoolwork as maybe we should have if there had been podcasts from people that could do that. But I love this technology. So let's get into it, because one of the things of long form programs like this is you can take a little bit of time. On the Rosenberg report, I've got 27 minutes to explain the latest developments in the region, or to focus, zoom in on one in particular, and sort of do call it a deep dive by television standards. But it's barely scratching the surface in many ways. But this podcast, for me, feels like it fits in this little constellation, this ecosystem of different ways of explaining, whether it's Joshua Fund newsletters or emails, or the Rosenberg report on TBN, or this, or all Israel news, all Arab news. All of it's designed to find ways to help you learn what's really happening and know better how to pray. Hopefully it's not just information, but it's action oriented, that it moves you from learning to praying, possibly even to giving to the Joshua Fund and like-minded ministries, and at some point going. We talk about learn, pray, give, go. Right now, we're not asking people to go to Israel. I believe we're going back to war, and we're going to explain why. I believe it's going to be a very intense season of several months of much more intense fighting in Gaza coming up very, very soon. We're going to talk about why. We'll talk later about an opportunity to go on something we thought, well, we're not ready. It's not safe enough really to bring people to Israel in 2025. So let's take people on a vacation with a purpose, an opportunity to go on a cruise to Alaska, refreshing, relaxing, beautiful times of worship and prayer and Bible study and lots of Q&A. Lots of Q&A. That seems to be what people want most. As I travel around the country on this Joshua Fund speaking tour, wow, that is what people want most. So we'll talk about that later in the program. Okay, Lynn, we've sort of given everybody a chance to sort of make their decisions. Let's get into what's really happening. Let's start with yesterday, Thursday, February 20th. We can work our way backwards into some of the other hostage releases, but I just think we've got to get right into the news. Why don't you describe what happened yesterday, just factually, and then we'll get into sort of the emotional impact and actually political impact of what we all saw and heard yesterday.
Yesterday which was Thursday, we anticipated, we learned earlier, a few days earlier, that yesterday the Hamas was going to release 4 bodies to us, and they told us who the bodies were, 3 of whom are the Bibas family, of course, and then an elderly man, an 83-year-old man named Oded Lifshitz, who is a journalist and a peace activist, actually, who'd spent his life helping Palestinians and specifically Gazans, that these 4 people had died in captivity and that their bodies were going to be taken back to Israel. Now, in the arrangements that were made with Hamas through the negotiations, it was said that this handover was going to be done in a dignified way. As you may know, all of the other hostage releases have been quite a spectacle. Really sick ceremonies that Hamas has put up, stages with posters. Thousands of people come and gather, bring their children, bring their whole families to watch as though this is something to celebrate, claiming victory over Israel, claiming all the evils. Like, the posters are just filled with slogans about how horrible, of course, Israel is. And the hostages are paraded out onto these stages. Sometimes they're made to smile and wave. Sometimes they're made to give speeches. Sometimes they've been given gifts, gift bags and certificates, and they have to pose. And it's been horrific to watch, but we've been able to sort of get through it and stomach it, knowing that in a few hours, they're going to be out. They're going to be handed to the Red Cross and then taken to the IDF and then brought across the border and taken to hospitals where their families are waiting.
It's like one more round of trauma. These are whether they're older men or whether they're young women in their 20s, they are herded like cattle through masked, armed, bloodthirsty terrorists, people that have murdered their own family members and their friends and have tortured them for more than 500 days. And then it's almost suffocating. If you had any other issues related to claustrophobia or just the fear of this whole sea of Hamas terrorists, and then you can barely breathe as they're moving through, trying to make it into a van to be taken out. It's mind-boggling, horrifying images, and it's happened time after time. But yesterday was not like the other days.
It was not, and it was at the same time. So they told us that, so the agreement was they weren't going to have this kind of a horrific ceremony, but in fact they did. They actually had a gathering, a stage, a ceremony where they brought the 4 coffins with pictures up onto the stage. They had the Red Cross workers standing there. They had huge poster of the Bibas, of Shiri and her children, and Oded, with a Dracula picture of Bibi as though he had killed them.
Prime Minister Netanyahu is nicknamed Bibi.
Yes, right. And apparently the coffins themselves were locked, and they were given keys. The IDF was given keys that actually didn't open the coffins. It was like at every stage, they were celebrating death. They were making it as horrible and barbaric as they possibly could.
Because people are chanting and singing.
There's music. There's celebratory.
They're just reveling in what they believe is victory over Israel, and as though a humiliating ceremony is going to be the death of the Jewish state.
And it's just so sad to see children. I mean, to see people bringing their children to this ceremony, celebrating the death, the murder of a mother and her two little boys who had
Take a
no.
moment and let's take a moment and just like before we go further, could you just talk a little bit about Shiri Bibas, the mom, and the two boys? Let's paint a picture so people can understand a little bit more of who they are. Let's note that their father, Yarden, was released recently. He had been in Hamas captivity. They were captured at the same time, taken kidnapped on. They were kidnapped on October 7th from a kibbutz that Lynn, you and I have been to and toured through because of all that has happened. And survivors of that day walked us through this kibbutz called Nir Oz, right on the border of Gaza.
Yeah.
But then immediately this family was separated. The father was taken one way. There is video imagery of Shiri grasping her two little boys. One was 9 months at the beginning, and the other was about 3, I think. And redheaded, beautiful. You'll explain in a moment, but just in sheer terror. First, she's not with her husband. She doesn't know what's really happening, and she's fighting for her two boys' lives. And then they disappear for 500 days.
Yeah. Yeah, Shiri is 32 and Yarden's 34. And when he was taken captive, Ariel was 4 and Kfir was 9 months old. Shiri's parents were also murdered on October 7th, both her mother and father. So Yarden lost his wife, his children, and his in-laws. Both the grandparents of those little boys were killed on October 7th. They actually weren't taken by Hamas people on that day. They were taken by armed civilian Gazans who later claimed that they were part of some sect that nobody had heard of, something called the Mujahideen Brigade. And then, they disappeared. There was video footage of them at one point of Shiri and the two little boys. She's got like a blanket over her, and you can see the boys, and she's being sort of shuffled around in a village somewhere in Gaza.
And they become among the most, if not the most recognized family, in part because these boys were so beautiful. Red hair, the gingy boys, they really stuck out, and people have done all kinds of things to. It's almost like they became a brand. That's not the fair way to put it, but I just mean, like, because they had this orange hair that's very few Israelis have, they just stuck out, and they were cherubic, and there was video of them. One of them, just in a little Batman outfit, just running around. They love Batman pajamas. I'm getting emotional because I can just picture our own boys at those ages, innocent and carefree and just wanting to be a superhero, right? And and they became world recognized because these were the youngest victims, the youngest hostages, and they were just so easy to remember and think, how is it possible? I mean, okay, even if you think this is a military attack and you're going to hold Israeli soldiers hostage, that's horrible, but kind of understand the horrors of war. But babies, toddlers?
Yeah. I think, there were 251 people taken hostage that day, and that's a lot. That's a huge number of people. And all over Jerusalem and all over Israel, there's huge banners everywhere with all the faces of all those 251 people, and on the ambulances. And just everywhere you go, you see pictures of hostages, and it's hard to know all their stories, to keep all of their names. But yeah, because like you said, of their cute red hair and everything, and because they are the young, Kfir is the youngest. But also I think it's because people just felt like surely any person on earth could look at these children and this mother and say, this is wrong. Any person on earth should be able to sympathize. And yet we know in America, for instance, people were tearing down posters of these children. There's videos of people. It just shows you the level of coldness, of hard-heartedness that there
anti-Semitism,
is in the world.
Jew hatred that has risen up in people all over the world, including the United States, that I don't think we all thought was still there. I mean, we probably know at some point evil lurks in people's hearts, but this just roared up, not 500 days later, on October 8th, October 9th, October 10th. It was almost immediate, the reaction against Israel, against Jews, and even against this precious family.
Yeah. And, on the coffins, the Hamas people wrote the names and had a picture of each one. And then it said arrested on October 7th. I mean, who arrests a 9-month-old and a 4-year-old and a mom? So it's just mind-boggling, the level of barbarism and evil. And now back in around, I think it was December of 2023, Hamas claimed that Shiri and the children had been killed by an Israeli airstrike. And there was video footage of them telling Yarden this news and watching him react and be heartbroken. But the IDF had never confirmed. They'd never been able to confirm that was true and accurate information. Right. So all this time, all these 500 days, I think all of us just refused, even though we thought, could they really, I mean,
there could have been an accident, right? It could have happened that Israel hit a building, didn't know they were in there. But
we know the hostages are being used as human shields, that they were being held in places where the fighters were shooting off missiles. So we've heard testimony of that from many.
You and
hostages.
I personally, I've heard that.
So it's not out of the realm of possibility that could have been true. And then we know that when this hostage deal happened in January, the first people that were supposed to be released were women and children. And so every time this group of 3 or 4 or 5 people would be released and we wouldn't see the Bibas children and Shiri, it became more and more, we became more and more anxious that maybe they weren't going to be coming out. But I think the whole country just really refused to believe that it could be true. We just wanted to see so much to see them walk out of Gaza and to be reunited. That was the hope and the dream of everybody here. And so yesterday was heartbreaking. And then not only was this horrible,
so there's two worse things we need to say, and then we're going to take a break for a moment and let you all catch your breath. But let's explain both what happened, what's the story with Shiri's body, and then also what did we learn about the boys?
So, like I said, after this horrible ceremony, the coffins were transferred to the Red Cross and then transferred to the IDF and then driven out of Gaza. And unlike in the past where live hostages are driven to a hospital, these 4 caskets, these 4 bodies were taken to a forensic center for their DNA to be checked to see and to verify who they really were.
First, let's just note that the IDF had to use technology to check to see if these were booby-trapped caskets, because in the past, Hamas has sent bombs in caskets to blow up and injure or kill Israeli soldiers involved in the transfer. So that had to be done first. Then, as you say, that a casket was brought into Israel and immediate forensic analysis was done by people who are experts at studying the remains of bodies to find out how did they die, and also running DNA tests. Is this body the person that they say that Hamas says it is?
Yeah. So yesterday, first we heard the first news that came was that Oded had been identified, that it was really him.
Oded Lifshitz, yes.
Lifshitz, yes. And then later in the day, we were all just waiting to hear. Then it was confirmed that the two of the caskets were indeed the 2 Bibas children. However, the casket that was marked as Shiri Bibas is not Shiri Bibas. It's not even any Israeli that's in any record of being held hostage, of being killed, of being taken in any way. We don't know. It's just an unidentified female body, but it is not Shiri. And so it's just another
stunning news. Yeah, this was really huge. It broke for us late in Pacific time. And I just started seeing people texting me and on Twitter or X now, just like, wait, what is that? I mean, the idea of trying to deceive Israel by handing back a murdered mother, and except it's not actually her.
Yeah.
what, just, what has just happened? And so where is she? Where is her body? Is she alive? Like, we don't know what to think. And imagine how hard it was for Yarden. I mean, it's one thing to have horrific closure, but this isn't closure. But then it gets worse.
Not only were they testing them to see and confirm their identities, they were also testing to see how they died. Is it true what Hamas claimed, that they were killed in some sort of explosion or airstrike or something like that?
Right.
And so literally just in the last hour or so, it's been released, the news has been released that they were killed, they were murdered with some other humans' bare hands. They were not shot, they did not blow up. We're talking
about the little children. Just to be clear, everyone, we're talking about these two baby, a baby and a toddler, 4 years old, and one of them, of course, had turned 1, right? So during this process, they weren't shot. Well, first of all, that would be horrific enough. But they were murdered with terrorists' bare hands.
Yeah.
Almost certainly in front of each other. Let me just read the quote from the IDF spokesman. This is just hitting everybody so hard. It was bad enough what happened yesterday at every level of what Lynn's talking about. But now this is the IDF spokesman. We can confirm that baby Kafir Bibis, just 10 months old, and his older brother Ariel, meaning 10 months old when he was taken hostage, and his older brother Ariel, aged 4 when he was taken, were both brutally murdered by terrorists being held hostage in Gaza no later than November 2023. So now what they're saying is the IDF is confirming that these boys were taken alive. We all know that because we saw the videos and we saw the footage and the still images. We know they were taken alive and unharmed. I mean, traumatized, but physically unharmed. And less than a month and a half later, certainly by no later than the end of November 2023, they were dead. Continuing with the quote, these two innocent children were taken hostage alive along with their mother, Shiri, from their home on October 7th, 2023. Now, I'm reading the quote from the IDF spokesman, Rear Admiral Daniel Hagari. And he said this on live television in Israel. Continuing his quote, contrary to Hamas's lies, Ariel and Kafir were not killed in an airstrike. Ariel and Kafir Bibis were murdered in cold blood by terrorists. The terrorists did not shoot the two young boys. They killed them with their bare hands. Afterward, they committed horrific acts to cover up these atrocities. This assessment is based on both forensic findings from the identification process, right? This is DNA testing. This was a medical examiner. That's the type of training that you can do. And you've looked at thousands of dead bodies and you've analyzed them and you can compare. And what happens when someone is exploded or a building falls on them and what happens. So this is the forensic analysis. So this assessment is based both on two different ways: forensic findings from the identification process, and this is an interesting phrase, from intelligence that supports these findings. We have shared these findings, intelligence, and forensics with our partners around the world so they can verify it. I think that's a direct reference to Israel giving it to the CIA and to the American government this is our assessment. What do you guys think, right? What is that telling us? What do they mean by intelligence? Well, it may mean from captured terrorists that they've actually been able to get, that they've been able to do interrogations. It may mean testimony of other hostages that were with these boys. Now, I want to put some context here, and then we're going to go take a break, give you a chance to process this, and we're going to come back and we're talking about what happened yesterday and what's been happening in recent weeks, in my view, means that Israel is 100% going back to war in Gaza. And that's going to happen soon. I'll explain that in a moment. But I just want to say that when I was in Gaza as a reporter for All Israel News and the Rosenberg Report, and I was taken into that newly discovered terror tunnel underneath Khan Yunis, the largest city in the south of Gaza where Hamas was having its base camp of running the war from those tunnels. This had just been newly captured by the IDF, and my colleagues and I were taken into those tunnels, and we were taken into a cage where at least 12 hostages were held, and the commander of the 98th Division, Dan Golfus, he told us that children had been in that cage. He didn't have to say who, because there's only two children, and this is the Bibas boys. And so we knew, and that was based on both intelligence and DNA. There was evidence in that cage, things that they didn't reveal and things I wouldn't want to say, but there was evidence there that the Bibas boys had been held there. And so, and then right next to that cage was the place, the lair, the headquarters, the very luxurious headquarters, I would have to say, of the leadership of Hamas, Yahya Sinwar, the demon-possessed mastermind of October 7th, and his inner circle. So this is what the country's reeling with. This set one element of horror after another, down to the fact that two beautiful baby boys, innocent, could have been released. Oh well, we have a problem with Israel, but we're going to release them out of goodwill. These two babies, they were brutally murdered with the bare hands of Hamas terrorists, or possibly, maybe it wasn't Hamas, maybe it was these a terrorist from another terror group. But the point is, Palestinian radical Islamist jihadists, and this is why I say they're demon possessed. No, even a bad person cannot do this. I just, wow. So let's take a break. When we come back, we're going to process this. We're going to talk about why this means we're going back to war. We're going to talk about how the country is reacting, how the world is reacting, and I'm going to ask Lynn more about how she's reacting, and believers that she knows all over the country that she's in touch with. Let's take a break. We'll come back with Inside the Epicenter in just a moment. But let me just share the scripture that's on my heart as we're processing this here on Friday, Isaiah chapter 40, the first verse. Comfort, O comfort my people, says your God. Speak kindly to Jerusalem and call out to her that her warfare has ended, that her iniquity has been removed, that she has received of the Lord's hand double for all her sins. Welcome back to Inside the Epicenter. I know this has been a difficult episode, but it's important. I wish that I could bring you more good news. We both do, and we're going to keep bringing you good news when we can. We're going to try to mix things up, right? We had wonderful news from the National Prayer Breakfast and our conversations with Israel's Deputy Foreign Minister and a member of the opposition, and we see God moving. And we're going to take you to Egypt in the next episode. Really exciting developments happening there, even after horrors for Egyptian Christians. But Lynn and I and one of our Joshuan colleagues was just in Cairo, and we want to bring you a firsthand report from there, including my exclusive interview with Jonathan Rumi, who plays Jesus in the global TV phenomenon, The Chosen. What an interesting interview that was, and really encouraging that whole trip. And that's going to be, Lord willing, the next episode of Inside the Epicenter from Cairo. So now, let me put that in context just for a moment. This is part of the messianic prophecies that, because the next verse is very famous. Those who are Christians and been Christians for a while and know the scriptures will recognize this. Isaiah 40, verse 3, a voice is calling, clear the way for the Lord in the wilderness, make smooth in the desert a highway for our God. Let every valley be lifted up, and every mountain and hill be made low, and let the rough ground become a plain, and the rugged terrain a broad valley. Then the glory of the Lord will be revealed, and all flesh will see it together, for the mouth of the Lord has spoken. What this is describing is that you can bring comfort to the people of Israel, even despite all the traumas that Jews have been through, that Israel has been through throughout the centuries, God wants to bring comfort to his people. And we are, as people who love the Lord, supposed to speak kindly to the people of Jerusalem, the people of Israel, because there is hope. Because this is describing the ministry of John the Baptist, right? We know this from the New Testament, from the Gospels, that John the Baptist, John, a Jew who knew the Lord and was sort of operating in the prophetic spirit of Elijah, was preaching, get ready because the Messiah is coming. The glory of God is come to earth and he's coming. So get ready. And just like any king, you would make a clear pathway, and you'd sort of, we do it even today. If you live in Washington, or if you're in a city where a major presidential motorcade is coming through, they're going to clean the streets, and they're going to put up flags, and they're going to, all the security, and it's going to be clear the way of the president is coming, right? And it needs to be prepared. That was happened in ancient times with kings, and so this is what the scriptures are saying. Because ultimately, only the Messiah of Israel can bring comfort to the people of Israel, or to any peoples anywhere. That's the peace that passes all understanding. That's what the scriptures speak of, that the Messiah can forgive our sins, heal our souls, refresh our spirits, and nothing else can. It's not that we can't comfort each other humanly as best we can, and we should, right? But ultimately, some wounds are so deep and some traumas are so bad that unless God heals it, it cannot be healed. You can try to cover it with alcohol, with pharmaceuticals, with all kinds of other, entertainment, whatever. But you're just masking. You're just trying to medicate deep, deep wounds. And those can be wounds that are trauma like war or terror, but it can be loneliness. It can be betrayal by a friend, by a spouse, by a parent or a child, physical traumas. Only God can heal that deep, deep, deep in our souls and our psyches. And this is what the Lord is speaking of here. But even if you take it just in the general, we need to speak comfort to the people of Israel who are going through this trauma. And as I've been traveling around the country, Lynn, speaking in Washington and Texas, here in California, elsewhere, lots of Q&A. People have so many questions. It's so interesting. We go for hours and hours with Q&A, and I really appreciate that. People are asking good questions. I was at one session, and the president of a West Texas University was in the audience, and I said, I hope I'm getting some sort of honorary doctorate out of this. These are really good questions, and they're not easy questions, and I'm so grateful for that. But one of the questions people ask, is, how is Israel going to heal from what effectively is PTSD? And I said, well, that's ultimately only God, but we're not even to the P in PTSD. This is not post-trauma disorder syndrome, right? This is current trauma. This is ongoing trauma, and you can't. Even humanly speaking, with human psychology, human psychiatry, you can't get through trauma until it's post, right? It has to come to some sort of closure before you can begin to come through it. So I think we were dealing, Lynn, with an entire country that's going through trauma, and it feels like it just keeps getting worse every single day. We'll talk about in a moment why I believe we're going back to war and the implications of that, but just your own, what you're seeing, what you're feeling, what you're seeing in the country, what you're seeing among other believers. What can you report to us from Jerusalem?
Well, yeah, yesterday was a very cold and rainy here in Jerusalem and in a large part of Israel. That the weather really matched the mood of everyone. It just felt like the skies were open and crying with the rest of us. Even though it was cold and very windy and raining, hundreds and hundreds of people thousands of people lined the streets along those highways, the sides of those highways where the vehicles that were carrying the coffins to, through Israel and to the forensic center. People were in Hostage Square, of course, like they have been 24/7 since October 7th. but especially on these Saturdays and now several other on Thursday, yesterday, they gather more and more people, thousands gather just to be together. Just it felt like I saw on various social media posts, everyone was saying, where can we be together? Where is there going to be a place to gather together, to mourn together? Where should we be? Many people just, canceled everything. I was supposed to have several different meetings yesterday, and just people had no stomach to do anything else.
Yeah.
Just no stomach to do anything else.
People just wanted to sit and watch television and see it unfold and try to. I remember similar moments. First, certainly throughout this war, there's been inflection points that were like everybody sort of comes to a halt. But I remember even at the beginning of the Gulf War. Or the second Gulf War, the invasion of Iraq, and just or 9/11. Remember, where you just everybody stops. I remember on 9/11, we lived in Washington D.C. It was unfolding in our own city. The Pentagon had been attacked. There was all kinds of horror, and just most of our friends just called and said, "Can we just come over?" Like, sure, and we sort of became like. A little command post. We didn't have there's nothing we could do but be together and comfort one another and sort of order pizza. I don't think we were that hungry. We just were trying to process the day and be in touch with people. But people want connection in a time of trauma.
Yeah. So that's what yesterday was. It was a lot of, just staying glued to the TV, which probably is not always the best thing to do, but you just want to see any shred of information and what's going on. And you want to feel like you're part of, what's happening, and you want to be with the country. And, there were a lot of journalists walking along those highways asking people how they're feeling. Why are they out in the rain? What motivates them to be here? And the biggest emotion was anger. Even more than sadness, just such anger over and over again. Like, how could this have happened? And it's such a symbol for people of the vulnerability too. A young mother and her children being dragged off by terrorists and then being returned murdered. This is not supposed to happen. That's why the country of Israel exists, so that this kind of thing won't happen to the Jewish people anymore. And so there was just such an anger that the government has failed them, that the military failed them. Why weren't they rescued? Just a lot of anger and anger at Hamas. How could they be this barbaric, this horrible? So a lot of anger. Then also there was another kind of anger, which was there was a lot of interviews yesterday with family members of people whose family were killed by terrorists in the last 15 years, 20 years, 10 years, who were in prison. These terrorists were in prison, and now they've been released. Right. So they would meet with, say, a man whose brother was killed on in a terrorist attack on a bus. And now that, a terrorist that killed 40 plus people on a bus, and now he's just walking free because and so they were asking them, how do you feel about this? How do you feel about the fact? And, that particular man, I wish I could remember his name, but I just was very struck by what he said, which is, he said, "This is terrible and beautiful." He said, it's a terrible, terrible price to pay, but it's a beautiful thing when you can see people, come home, even if it's people who have died, but to have them back, to be able to give them a dignified burial.
I want to make sure that people got that transition. Lynn's not referring obviously to the Palestinian terrorists that are being released. She's talking about the caskets that are coming home, at least of 3 of the 4 being actual Israelis, like just being able to be buried properly, honored properly, and have closure on those. Yeah, this is, both tragic and beautiful.
Well, he was saying it's terrible that these terrorists are being released. These prisoners are being released who have killed, people, dozens of people who have blood on their hands. So that's what he meant. That right, part of it. But
at least it was bringing people back, hostages back. Yeah, exactly. That's what I'm just trying to make sure people heard that right. But let me transition to this maybe a final point or a near final point. This is exactly the emotion that is rising so rapidly, right, center, left of the political spectrum, is anger. that I believe there will be 100% political, or close to 100% political support for going back to war in Gaza. I don't see a scenario in which the government of Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu doesn't go back into full combat in Gaza to finish the job. I think one question that remains is how many live hostages are left. Okay, we're going to find out if we get 6 live Israeli hostages out tomorrow, Saturday, February 22nd. Saturday, February 22nd. We hope they are alive and we get them all back. Then the question is how many more that are alive. Israel wants every body back, obviously. We want to bury them properly. We want to honor them. But I don't believe there will be any political support for releasing Palestinian terrorists with blood on their hands, murderers, rapists, terrorists, in order to get bodies back. In part because President Trump has said once Israel eradicates and vanquishes Hamas in Gaza, then the United States of America is going to own Gaza and rebuild it, and that will give Israel's military all the time it needs to recover bodies and identify them properly and give them proper burials. I don't think that Netanyahu is going to have any stomach, much less his government, much less even the opposition. I just don't see, Lynn, tell me if you think I'm wrong, that there's going to be stomach for releasing live terrorists in order to get bodies back, unless those are bodies that, as a mix of live hostages and caskets, to get every live hostage out that we possibly can. Because I think when we go back to war, you'd have to expect that that's the end of the lives of anybody else who's living, that they will be, that any Israeli would be killed during that time. I mean, hopefully not, but I don't think you could depend on it. So that's why Netanyahu is continuing the deal as hard as it is to get every living hostage back. Lynn, you and I haven't actually talked since I'm traveling and you're in Israel, and we're talking. When we talk about Joshua and work, and we talk about family and our kids, and we pray together. But we haven't talked about this. What's your assessment?
Well, the Israeli government says there are 66 total hostages that remain in Gaza, and that out of those 66, they believe 30 of them are dead. So they believe there's, do the math for me,
36 left that would be alive.
36 live hostages. So 6 of them will be, God willing, released tomorrow.
Okay.
So there'll be 30 left. There's 13 soldiers. 7 of those soldiers have died. Hopefully there are 36 living hostages that we're going to see come out. I don't know. Once we know that all those live hostages are out, I don't know what the calculus will be. Yeah, I think that the Israeli people do want to have closure, but I think they're getting less and less patient with Hamas just taunting and tormenting people psychologically is what.
Yeah, and I this could sound partisan, but it isn't. It's just analytical. There is a fundamental difference, a tectonic shift between the previous administration and this administration, meaning the previous administration really wanted a hostage deal with a ceasefire then that was it. That was the end of the war. It's a permanent ceasefire. Israel withdraws militarily from Gaza, and let's just call it a day. No more killing, no more bombing. That's it. Netanyahu resisted this approach by President Biden and his team, and Netanyahu had the full support, or actually not full support, but mostly support from his government. There were internal fights. I remember the previous defense ministers believed that it was time to make a deal last fall, and that was a big knockdown, drag out battle between then defense minister and the prime minister over when's the right time to make a deal with a permanent ceasefire. But Netanyahu adamantly believed that was wrong. Why? Because it would leave Hamas in power. They would rebuild and they would claim victory. And this would be a devastating effect on Israel's national security and deterrence against all other enemies. If Hamas, in poverty-stricken, hellish conditions in Gaza, can defeat or at least survive a full-on war with Israel, then this would be a horrible message to send to all of Israel's enemies. And so Netanyahu's absolutely rejected the Biden-Harris approach, and Secretary of State then Tony Blinken. No, we're not accepting a permanent ceasefire. Now, with the arrival of President Trump and Secretary of State Rubio and that whole team, now the answer is 100% Israel will win. Hamas must be eradicated. That is the sort of the deafening roar, as it were, from the Trump team. And we're beginning to see even some Arab countries say, as they try to negotiate with President Trump about what the future of Gaza should be, they're saying Hamas may not rule Gaza. Now, there's still a lot of disagreements. We're not going to cover the future of Gaza on this program. We will in an upcoming episode because it's really important. And I've been meeting in Washington with very senior officials in the Trump administration, and I've been meeting with Arab leaders and in touch with Arab leaders, and of course, Israeli leaders at very senior levels. So I want to do an episode with you soon to kind of walk through what might the future of Gaza look like based on President Trump's very bold, very controversial statements. That's a whole program, at least one, maybe two, unto itself. But I think what we're watching is a growing consensus, including because of these images and because of the moves that Hamas is making. Even somewhat skeptical world governments and leaders are starting to say, okay, Hamas cannot stay in power. And that's why I believe we're going to war. Whether that happens this week, next month, 2 months, Israel now feels at the government level that it has the time to figure it out. It has time to be patient because it has President Trump's full support. So I think that this is, well, among other reasons, this is a major reason to pray, to get every hostage out and to vanquish Hamas once and for all. It's also a reason that we're not inviting people to come to Israel in 2025. As much as we would love you to come, it's just not right, because I think we're going back to war, at least for a few months. And Israeli soldiers who've been tired, exhausted even from all this. Now I think the ceasefire has been helpful, I think, wouldn't you say, Lynn, to sort of re-strengthen everybody physically, but also all these images are strengthen the resolve of Israelis. We have to finish. We have to win. There can't be any doubt at the end of this war who has won and who's in charge of Gaza.
Yeah, that's true. And because things have changed on the northern border going forward, it may be that we'll have more troops and more ability to focus just on one front. So that's something people are kind of thinking could be an advantage. Although the longer we're not there, the longer there hasn't been fighting, the more it's given Hamas a chance to strengthen itself too. And so it's not going to be some kind of easy situation by any stretch of the imagination if we do go back to war. So nobody's looking forward to that. That's for sure.
Yeah. And Lynn, absolutely, let's just absolutely underscore that you're right, that on the northern front with Lebanon, things are quiet. There's a ceasefire. There are still ongoing negotiations about exactly what that ceasefire is going to look like, how long it's going to last. But it's quiet for now. But in Judea and Samaria, what the world calls the West Bank, Israeli operations are ongoing. There's a very serious concerns because Hamas is very popular in the Palestinian Authority. If there were elections today, Hamas would win. So there's a lot of cells, a lot of Israeli operations. A special unit called Duvdavan is going in and capturing terrorists, capturing weapons all the time. And there was just maybe you could close on the bus plot that was just uncovered and diffused literally as well as figuratively yesterday, Thursday.
Yeah, yesterday in the evening, 3 different buses in 3 different parking lots, all in central Israel, just a little bit south of Tel Aviv in a city called Bat Yam. 3 buses just blew up. Thank God there was no people on them. They were out of service. They were in parking lots. However, it quickly became obvious that it was some sort of coordinated terror attack, and so they immediately
and the bombs had just detonated prematurely, right? They were supposed to be like on the morning commute, probably.
Yes. So I've heard 2 different things. One, I heard that these 3 bombs went off, just that there was a malfunction. Then I also heard that one of the timers, I read that one of the timers, that they had set it for PM instead of AM, literally, like,
Okay.
just crazy when you think about that's just God's mercy and grace.
Yeah, absolutely.
I mean, those 3 buses, the plan was for them to explode. So instantly, of course, the government and the transportation department instructed all buses to stop and to check what's going on, to check their buses. 2 more bombs were found in the central Israel. Also, and they were diffused, those 2 bombs. Good. So 5 bombs were actually, there would have been this morning, literally 5 buses full of people that exploded. And
we haven't, just to be clear, just by context, we haven't had bus bombings in Israel in 23 years or so. I mean, it was just second intifada period from about 2000 to 2003, roughly. So maybe 22 years that we haven't had bus bombings. If that had happened, then we would be at war in Judea and Samaria. Like this is how bad this thing is right now.
And actually, the people that took responsibility for it are Hamas group or branch or whatever division in Tulkarm, which is a city, actually was like 10 minutes from where we first lived when we first moved to Israel, in central Israel, just near Netanya, just straight east from Netanya. So that's where this plot came out of. They've taken credit for it.
Right. So people, if you're not familiar with Israeli geography, this is what the world calls the West Bank. What we would say is Judea and Samaria. This is Tulkarm is a city right on the border with Israel, right by the security wall. This is a Palestinian radical Islamist city where many suicide bombers and bus bombers over the years came, because Tulkarm is on the Palestinian side of the security wall in the narrowest part of Israel. If you think of Israel like a 3, it's the narrow part of the 3 that it's just about an 18-mile swath between the Palestinian Authority on that side of the wall and the Mediterranean. And so in that corridor, which is Route 57, which goes east-west, we live just off of 57, and there's a junction there. That was where I think the worst set of, I think it was a double bus bombing happened. A bus bomb went off, and then all the rescue units, first responders arrived, and then a second, I think a suicide bomber went off. And so it was just a double terror attack. And so there's that corridor, it was just the most deadly corridor. It was before we arrived, before we lived in that area. But this is what's happening. Hamas is very strong in the West Bank, and that's why Israeli special forces and commando units are going in every night, capturing terrorists, capturing weapons, because a whole third intifada, a whole new front. Essentially, it's already open, but it hasn't gotten public support. We're not seeing like hundreds of thousands of Palestinians get into the fight against Israel at the same time. So that's a lot to process. I think we need to close this. Any last points that you want to make, Lynn? And of course, we'll share a little bit about going to Alaska, which is hard to say, but I think we need to give people a sense that there's an option to do something relaxing and refreshing and focus on what's going on in Israel, in the region, without taking people yet to the region. But we'll close that in a moment. But any other final points you want to make? This has been a big week.
Yeah, I think it's really just praying for the people of Israel, that they would cry out to the Lord, that they would turn to him, they would turn to his word for comfort, and that the people that know the Lord would be there to give words of comfort, words of hope. So praying for the churches, the believers are grieving just like everybody else, and yet they do have words of hope. But you just want to ask the Lord for wisdom how to speak those words of hope. So I think praying for the churches to be strong, to be listening to what God's asking them to do. And then, like you said, we know that there's such a need already for counseling, and going forward, there's going to be a great, a continuing need. Thankfully, a hopeful thing that some of the Christian counselors are telling us is that not everybody gets PTSD. It's actually a small percentage of people that go through a trauma actually have a PTSD after a trauma. That God has made the human soul and body and mind is so resilient and able, and some people actually become stronger and end up becoming more sympathetic and starting things and doing good works that they wouldn't have done if they hadn't gone through that trauma. So, but there is a lot of people that are going to have this kind of post-trauma, especially children. So we need to be praying for that.
Yeah, that's a great point. And I didn't mean to be acting as a trained counselor or a psychiatrist or a psychologist when I said the whole country is going through PTSD. Just to be clear, I was using that as a broader sense of the trauma people are going through. That doesn't mean it will last forever, and it doesn't mean it will lead to sort of a medical diagnosis of PTSD. But I'm just saying the whole country is going through trauma.
Absolutely.
And, and I also want us to be praying for, obviously, for the families that are still waiting to hear, are there loved ones alive that are being held hostage? Did you say the number is 66 at this moment?
66 total hostages. The government is saying that 36 of them are alive. 30 of them they believe are dead.
They believe. Okay. So,
but they haven't released the names of any.
Right. So let's be praying for all those families. Obviously, let's be praying for those hostages that have been released, and what they're trying to do is to re-enter society. I was texting with the family of one and asking if this person was ready to maybe to start talking yet about what he has gone through, and the family saying not yet. It's just too much right now. So just understanding that. And the last thing I would be saying is praying for those in the Israeli military, Israeli police forces, because because we're getting ready to go back to war. And so those who are in active service, they have to kind of gear up for that. Those who know they're going to be called back into reserve, that's hard. These are adult professionals, or they have jobs, they have businesses, they have lives that aren't. It's not like the American military where you have people that this is what they do professionally every day for their entire military service. Now, these are people that go back to be a baker, a teacher, a plumber, fixing cars, selling stocks, whatever it is, building the next app. They all are getting notices right now that they're being called up. We know somebody personally who, many actually, that are being told, next month, report to this spot. And then there are others who are young and getting drafted right now and thinking, okay, is this war over, or am I getting drafted into a military that we're in, and I'm going to go to war soon? And so there's a lot of pieces here, and every family in the country is having to deal with that. So, wow. Okay. So let's close with something hopeful. Look, we as we were praying last year, what is something that we could all do with the Joshua Fund that is not just an Epicenter briefing where we take you to a hotel? That's a wonderful thing, but it's basically that's a wonderful 2.5 days. But we thought, let's just mix it up a little bit. People are exhausted by this war. They've been through so much. We've got so many wonderful prayer warriors, prayer supporters, and financial supporters, and then others who are just interested in the Joshua Fund. They've learned about the Joshua Fund throughout this season, maybe, and they're thinking, I want to know more, but no, I am not going to Israel on some tour with you, Joel. It's not gonna do it. Like, what is there something else we could do? And so that's why we put together this Alaska cruise, and you can learn more about it at joshuafund.com. It's August 2nd through the 9th. Lynn and I will be hosting it, and there are still cabins available. And we would love to have you come. Many of you are going to plan a summer vacation anyway, right? And this is a vacation with a purpose. It's going to be beautiful. We have never been to Alaska. And so it's something that we think, wow, that would be just something different. But it's also going to be amazing worship time. It's going to be times in the Word. It's going to be times of lots of Q&A. We're going to build in lots of Q&A for you. We're going to teach from the scriptures. We're going to teach on Bible prophecy. What's the future of Israel in Bible prophecy? What's the future of Gaza in Bible prophecy, and Egypt and the other countries? We're going to bring partners, ministry partners of the Joshua, people that we love and that we, as this ministry invests in and invest in their teams, Israeli believers, Arab believers, who are going to help you understand what's happening in the epicenter in such a rich way. That's the morning. And then you get the whole afternoon to sit on deck as we work our way up from Vancouver up into Alaska and back. There's going to be days that we land, and you can go on an excursion and just see the Alaskan wilderness, the incredible, stunning beauty. It'll be so refreshing. If you come, maybe you're single and you want to come by yourself, fine, wonderful. Or maybe bring some friends. Maybe bring your Bible study and say, let's do this together. Couples, come. You can certainly come as a family. It'll be a very family-friendly trip. Maybe you're a retired couple. And so anyway, it'll be a wonderful time. And then, so you get the whole afternoon to yourselves, to be refreshed, to take a nap if you want. Although, as much as you might want a nap, you might think, oh my gosh, this is just so stunning. And then in the evenings, we'll have dinner all together. And then we'll have an evening, again, more worship, more study, more panel sessions and Q&A. And I think we're going to need it. I think it's an opportunity to just say, look, it's a hard season, and I don't know. You and I don't know, Lynn, what's the Middle East going to look like in August of 2025? It's unknowable, but I think we need something. That's what we feel like the Lord wants us to offer: a refreshing opportunity to learn and to pray, but also to get away and be refreshed. I think people need that. It's not a fundraiser. There'll be opportunity, certainly, to give. We'll certainly explain some opportunities if you want to get involved. But this is not a fundraising event. It is an educational event, and it's an event to pray and be refreshed. So I'm looking forward to it more than ever. I wish it was next week, not the first week of August. But anything else you want to add about that before we wrap?
No, I'm just really looking forward to, I think we have a little over 100 people registered so far. And so there's still some room left, but it would be exciting to see all of those spaces fill up. Yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah, there are cabins available. So you can go to joshuafund.com. It's the first thing you'll see is a little banner that you can click on. It will give you all the prices, all the details. We'd love you to come, and we'd love you to invite, family, friends, your Bible study. Go, some of you want to do it, just as a couple or just single, but some of you think let's take others and learn about all this together and make a memory together. The last thing is, we would love you to continue to give financially to the Joshua Fund. We haven't focused on it so much today, but all the different ways that the Joshua Fund is ministering to the nation of Israel and to the Palestinians and others in the region through this time of horror. And there's going to be more needs. Lynn just mentioned biblical counseling. That is an area that the Joshua Fund finances several different ministries that are involved in that type of biblical counseling, and obviously much more is needed. So, and of course, humanitarian relief and just strengthening pastors that are on the front lines, as we've highlighted a number of them on this podcast over the past 16, 17 months. We'll share more on future programs, but we just wanted you to know about that. We would love it if you would give, and not only give, but maybe a one-time gift, but if you would become a monthly recurrent giver, this would be the best. It could be $25 a month, $50 a month, $100 a month. And this is, if you do this, you'll see an opportunity to do that on the donate page at joshuafund.com. And by signing up to be a monthly donor, you join a group called the Epicenter Allies. And so there's extra things that we'll share with you, and insights and events that you get invited to and so forth. because what we're trying to encourage is people who've been, maybe they give 1 or 2 times a year at Christmas or some other time. That is awesome. We're so grateful. But even becoming a steady monthly giver allows us just to know how to budget in a different way, because we know we've got people that are committed to giving on a monthly basis. So I encourage you to check that out, pray about that. And you can, and it's super easy to do. And of course, if you're Americans, it's tax deductible. If you're Canadians, it can be tax deductible also. And you'll find out information. It's just slightly unique, but it's not difficult process to go through to give as a Canadian. And others around the world, you're also able, if you're able, you're also welcome to give. I don't believe it's tax deductible. You'd have to figure that out in your own country. I can't walk through the 197 different countries or whatever it is on your own tax codes. Okay, that's our episode of Inside the Epicenter today. Any details about the cruise or anything else that we've mentioned, you can find in the show notes. Please be in touch with us. Give us your feedback. Ask us questions. In fact, a really important question came in just a couple of days ago. We'll do an episode on that soon. And let us know what you're thinking. Let us know how we can answer your questions. And there is information in the show notes on how to be in touch with the Joshua Fund and get that to us. Lynn, thank you so much for guiding us through sharing what you're seeing, what you're hearing. A very important episode, but certainly far from the most fun one that we've done.
Well, it's hard times, but we know that there's always hope, and the future is bright when we know the Lord has our future in His hands. So now Amen. I'm glad that people can hear and can pray. So thank you for joining us, those who've been listening, and share this with your friends so they can also know and be praying for the people of Israel.
Amen. For Lynn and myself and the entire Joshua Fund board and staff and the wonderful production team that makes this Inside the Epicenter podcast possible. These guys are the best. We love them, and we're so grateful. Thank you for listening, and we'll be with you as we go to Cairo on the next edition of Inside the Epicenter. Hey, I'm Joel Rosenberg. On your left, you'll find some videos we've chosen specifically for you. We look forward to partnering with you to bless Israel and her neighbors in the name of Jesus.